Welcome back to Transform Your Workplace. I'm your host, Brandon Laws. Today we're diving deep into empathy and why it's one of the most powerful tools you have as a leader. We're joined by Loren Sanders, author of the insightful book, Empathy is Not a Weakness and Other Stories from the Edge. Loren sheds light on why empathy isn't just a nice-to-have soft skill, but a strategic necessity for leaders who want to build engaged, high-performing teams. We'll explore common misconceptions, practical ways to strengthen your empathy muscles, and what it really takes to lead with intention and vulnerability. And speaking of supporting teams, if your organization is ready to simplify HR, payroll, and benefits administration, Xenium's HR plus Payroll has you covered. With everything under one roof and a dedicated team behind you, Xenium ensures your HR needs are seamlessly managed so you can focus on the human side of your business. Now let's jump into this insightful conversation with Loren Sanders and discover how empathy can truly transform your workplace. Enjoy. Loren, it is a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We're going to talk about your book, and I love talking about empathy. I find myself to be an empathetic person, but it's something you got to work on every day, and I know you've learned that over the years. Your book is called Empathy is Not a Weakness and Other Stories from the Edge, so I want to get into it. You said that empathy is a trait that leaders claim to value, but don't actually train, assess, or reward for. Why did you believe that? Or why do you believe it?
It's kind of like organizational values. Everybody's organization has values, but if you ask the leaders at the top, they'll tell you, oh yes, we live by these values every day. And if you ask the people at the bottom, they'll be like, what values? Espousing and action are very, very different. I think that everyone knows that empathy is necessary, but I don't know that they really want what they say they want. And I think it comes down to being a misconception that a lot of HR leaders and professionals are still grappling with, that it's somehow soft or weak. But in reality, what it does is it strengthens trust on teams. It reduces turnover. It increases engagement. So do you say you want it? Do you really want it? But it all comes down to, if you're not practicing it, you're getting worse.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think like there's a lot of learned behavior from leaders of the past too. And this is probably just rooted in old business too. It's just the fear-based leadership. And I know it doesn't create good outcomes in this modern day workplace. Why do you think it's hard for leaders who have seen other leaders use the fear-based practice? Like, do they absorb that? And is it hard for them to overcome that style, knowing that they grew up with that?
It's kind of like, I feel like I'm using a lot of cliches here, but what gets measured gets done, that kind of thing. Totally. So what gets rewarded is what gets repeated. And so if you're a leader who is being successful in every other way than being kind to your people, but you're getting the results and the outcomes that you need to have, nobody's going to look twice from higher up, because what they're seeing is the outcome. And if you're making money for the company, no matter how much turnover you have, no one's going to get rid of you. We like to think that it's not going to be that way, but the reality is it is that way. And people who feel that way about how they run teams and think that fear-based leadership is okay, think that empathy is about coddling people, when in reality, it's really about listening, understanding, and acting in a way that aligns with both people and business outcomes. And gosh, he got great results. And I say he globally, but not necessarily meaning a male leader. So I want to be clear about that. But let's say this person got great results in whatever they're doing by being kind of a jerk. How much better could their results be if they were actually empathetic and listened and used all of the tools in their toolkit? Could the outcomes potentially be even more grand, for lack of a better term?
I believe so.
Yeah. That's why we're here, right?
Yeah. There's a nugget that I pulled from your book that I thought was interesting. I want you to unpack it. You said that you learned more from your horrible leaders than you did from the good ones. What do you mean by that?
I learned a lot about what not to do, what wasn't effective, by kind of being in the trenches. And a lot of that comes down to my own story of having been a terribly toxic leader and having to have that aha moment. And I'll give you a little bit of the story, but I won't ruin it for the book. But there was a time when I didn't care about the people because we weren't here to sing Kumbaya. We were here to get a job done. And you could sing Kumbaya all you wanted when you left, but by golly, get your work done now. And we don't have to be friends. And someone left my team and left behind a lot of work that wasn't done and stuffed it into drawers and cabinets. And when I found it, I felt like a total victim. And I had a very amazing, empathetic leader that said, let's think about this. While I was ranting about how could that person do that to me, they told me to ask my team. And I said, I don't want to. But I had to do the thing I didn't want to do. And it started me on a path. I hate to think about the person I would be now if I hadn't had that leader that forced me to talk to my team about how they felt. And I was a lot younger then, and I was managing people that were my parents' age. And I honestly think, had I not been so young and had so many people my parents' age who were reporting to me, I don't know that I would have gotten that same qualitative feedback. I think they kind of took pity on me because I was a kid and they thought this is a good opportunity to teach her something that she needs to know, which is a huge blessing for me. I don't know that every leader would have the same result. But when I started paying attention to self-awareness, and oddly, I posted a big thing about self-awareness today on LinkedIn about why is sometimes looking in the mirror the hardest thing we have to do that makes us better. But had I not had that happen, I wouldn't have started a self-awareness journey. And then on that journey, I am very much an observer of people. And I started to pay attention to what actually got results and what didn't, and how different leaders made me feel or made other people feel. Started talking to different people about that exact thing. And that's kind of what culminated into the book. It started out being me taking notes and sticky notes and napkins and things as I started learning more about people and what they were experiencing, or leaders who had learned the hard way what not to do. And it was a big pile of notes that eventually became a book because I had a very good friend who had just published one that said, it's your turn.
Your turn. Do it. Yeah, it does take like intention to sit down and actually probably write a book. But those experiences that you learn, like the self-reflection journey, like the asking for feedback, that's a gift. Like the feedback, it is hard to look in the mirror and get that hard feedback. But to have that gift and then to do some self, like go on your own journey, like look at where you are now. So it's all worth it.
It's not easy though, I'll tell you. And reliving it as I wrote the book was kind of cathartic. I kind of relived all of those emotions that went along with that. So if someone is thinking about starting out on that self-awareness journey, and I want to be honest, sometimes that toxic person is you and it's not the leader. And you have to face that too sometimes, because some of us have been the toxic human being. Some of us have been the toxic leader. Some of us have been both. Some of us play the victim all the time, but looking in the mirror is the hardest thing you'll ever do. But I equate it to, you don't want to take the baggage from one journey into the next journey. Otherwise, all you have is a room full of luggage that you can't get out from under. And while it's hard, it's so worth the work.
You named the book Empathy is Not a Weakness. So why did you feel the need to proclaim that empathy is not a weakness? Do you think that most people believe that it's a weakness and you needed to make the case?
There's a ton of research out there that talks about, and if I could remember off the top of my head where all of it was from, there's a lot in a lot of different places if you just even Google it. But executives know it's important, but still think it's a weakness. I mean, even to this day, because again, they think that it means just being nice. And I do a lot of public speaking in this space, especially around areas of burnout. I'm also an executive coach in my world. And we talk a lot about how empathy, everyone talks about it being walking in someone else's shoes. And I always say that, yes, you can walk in someone else's shoes, but you still have to keep your own shoes on. You have to remember who you are and the intent of this. Oftentimes leaders that I talk to who fall more towards empathetic sometimes struggle with feedback, giving people feedback that is corrective. And we talk about how it's not empathetic to not give feedback that someone needs because you're not helping make that person better. You're not building them. You're not growing them. Empathy isn't just being nice.
Yeah. So like define that for me. Like I know a lot of people get sympathy and empathy mixed up all the time or just don't understand the definitions, but what's the key difference between those two statements? And maybe even is there an example that illustrates the difference between the two that you can think of?
Yeah. So somebody failed at something. How do you as a leader approach that failure? Brandon, you suck. I'm firing you. You made a mistake. Probably not the best approach.
No.
Because what's likely to happen? Brandon probably will never make that mistake again, hopefully, once he recognizes what happened in that situation and how or what he could have done differently. I think there's a lot of opportunity in reflecting with the human being on the other side of the mistake instead of telling somebody how wrong they were and how terrible what they did was. Give them the opportunity first to explain what happened and what do you think caused that to happen, and let them kind of self-reflect and then be the person that helps them construct something new out of something broken. I always talk about constructive feedback. And when we think about constructive feedback, it's everyone runs away and says, oh my gosh, no, please don't give me constructive feedback. But if you think about construction and what construction is, it is not taking a baseball bat to somebody and knocking them down. When we construct things, we're building them up. So the whole point of constructive feedback is I am here to listen and come beside you, hear your perspective, help you become even better than you are right now. And I think one of the first things that you can do as a leader is, like, I'm not asking you to start a group hug, okay? Everyone's always, kumbaya, group hugs. But if you can listen to one of your employees without checking your email at the same time, you're halfway there. That's a start.
Your book outlines a framework for how to build the empathy muscle. You talk about blind spots too. And I want to go back to the feedback that you got when you went on that self-reflection journey. Like, what kind of blind spots did you have that you became aware of when you solicited that feedback?
I think the biggest blind spot, and I'm still continuing to, I constantly am looking for my own blind spots. I really believe in having your own personal board of directors who can help you see things you may not be seeing. Like, assuming that you're always right first is a huge problem or blind spot. Someone once said, be a learn-it-all leader, not a know-it-all leader. I think the minute that you think you have all the answers, you're really in trouble. But I think it comes down to assessing what is happening in your own mind when you're with somebody that you don't agree with, and asking yourself, what is it that's making you have these feelings that this person is wrong or that you don't agree with them? Usually, if you look deep enough inside, you'll find it's one of your values that's being attacked in that. And, I like to ask myself, if something doesn't feel quite right, what of my values right now is coming into play? And I can even use a coaching example of that. I coach a lot of people, and I've never had a really terrible coaching experience until probably 6 months ago. And I also have a mentor coach and a supervising coach who I talk through these situations with. So I have somebody that helps me check my own understanding of what I'm doing so that I can continue to get better at what I do. But I was coaching someone, and they were talking about a situation that is something that I feel really strongly about. And as a coach, we're never supposed to get that invested in feeling personal feelings about what someone is talking about. And I'm usually pretty good at that. But this thing just attacked me from the gut. This was a session I was recording because I was going to go over it with my supervisor anyway. And the person knew I was recording it. I talked, I think, 12% of the conversation. And most of it was because the entire time I was thinking, you are a horrible person. And I've never had that happen in a session before. So being able to unpack that with my own mentor coach was really valuable experience, because what was happening is there was something that I deeply valued that this person was throwing into the garbage can in a major way. And I realized that I have a bias towards that particular thing, that particular value, and recognizing that is just one more thing that's helping me grow. But I never think I'm done growing. I'm one of those people that now thinks I have something to learn from everyone I meet, from the person cleaning the toilets all the way up to the CEO. I will learn something from you. I want to know your story. I want to be curious and interested in you. But it's so easy to just blow past our blind spots because that's how we were raised, or that's what we did.
Yeah, I think it's so important that you start your framework with the blind spots and just recognizing them, because I think like every interaction that we have or any situation that we come into, we're looking at it through the lens of whatever our belief system is, or our past experiences, or our values. And to have a moment like you had 6 months ago where you had one of your values being maybe not questioned, or just went against everything you believed in, perhaps, it almost, it attacks you, right? And then, but the hard work is in doing that self-reflection. And it's nice that you have somebody, but many people don't have somebody to help them process this.
I deeply believe everybody needs a coach. Everybody needs a coach.
Yeah. No, I so agree. You talk about being mindful in situations. Like, what do you mean by that exactly? Like, because let me rephrase this. Let's say your values are being questioned, like just like that situation. How in that moment could you have paused, reflected, and been mindful of what you were feeling or experiencing in that moment? It seems hard when you're in an interaction with somebody, and it can be emotionally charged at times. How do you become mindful in a moment that's, unless you just completely stop and just pause? To me, it feels awkward, but maybe unpack that for me.
I think generally speaking, it's not about you, especially in a coaching situation. So we're not here to take care of what I think in any way, shape, or form. And I have to put those thoughts or feelings as they pop up in the back of my brain and focus on the individual in front of me. Where I think we're challenged now, and I laugh because I watch friends and kids. Everybody in the world thinks they're ADHD right now because of all those TikTok videos that are telling us that we're all ADHD. But what I want to remind people of is a lot of times this stuff is very environmental. So what have we learned in the past several years? We read an article. The article has 17 links. So you start reading one article, and then you start clicking on all the links in the article, and then you read other articles, and then something else happens. And the world has taught us to not pay attention well. So then we get in front of a human being, and there's other distractions that are happening all the time. Your phone buzzes, somebody walks over. We're not very good at staying present with the human being who's in front of us right now. How many of us have been on a Zoom meeting where we're like, oh, my email just popped up. Let me click over here to this email. Yeah. And I love when people say, I'm sorry, I was on mute. And I always want to say, so you heard what I said. You just couldn't answer. Go ahead. But that's a little bit rough. But I think we've all had those moments where, oh no, we weren't paying attention, and hey, we can do better. I don't think there's anybody here listening that can't pay better attention, but trying to just spend time in the moment with someone, listening to what they have to say without trying to solution it. Yeah. Sometimes people just need an ear.
Totally.
Sometimes we can just say, hey, are you looking for solutions, or do you just want me to listen?
Yeah, I mean, this one's so important to me because, like, I think, with the pandemic, many people went remote, and, business was forever changed, and the way we work has forever changed. And I like remote work. I love my setup. I've got 3 27-inch monitors. It's like a giant terminal that I'm sitting at right now. But the distractions come with it. I could be on a group meeting or a one-on-one, and I have 2 other screens I can look at. Like, I can look at my email. I can look at my Microsoft Teams. It's super distracting. And what I feel like the last several years have done is we've gotten further and further apart from like the in-person stuff. And I'm not saying we need to just absolutely go back and force people to come back to work, but there's something about that in-person where you can just put your phone away, focus on the person in front of you, and truly like take in that moment. I don't know if you feel like the hybrid or remote work has caused some problems in this area or not, or maybe just what's your opinion?
I have not experienced that at all, but I'm also pretty good now at paying attention to the human being in front of me and connecting with them. I would say that's something that takes work, and you have to figure out what's right for you. I think where I more get concerned is the emotional load that a lot of roles have to take on, and understanding if you're the person listening to somebody with that emotional load, how do you process that and deal with that? So I think of HR. I think of helping professions, nurses, first responders. There's so many other professions too. But when I think about HR in general, because I know that's a lot of your population that you talk to, empathy for HR is remembering that they're often the forgotten people, kind of like IT. Nobody thinks about HR until they need you, right? Until they need you to do something. But HR professionals constantly carry the emotional load of an entire organization.
Yes.
But nobody's thinking about that, right? They have to handle the layoffs. They have to manage the toxic leaders. And for them, empathy becomes kind of a double-edged sword.
It does, because to be good at their job, they need to have empathy. But there becomes, I call it compassion fatigue. Like it gets to a certain point where they have so many emotions that they're carrying, and it's exhausting for them.
And they really have a lot to worry about at night when they go home, which we hope they don't do. We hope they can leave it behind, because, nobody ever says, well, the HR person didn't pay attention to me. They were on their phone the whole time. Yep. that HR person is there. They're listening. They're solving problems, but nobody ever thinks about them in an empathetic or compassionate way.
In this section, practicing my perspective, you reflected on how your intent to lead effectively sometimes didn't match your actions. Share more about that and how you work to align your intent and the actions. And, for other leaders who are listening, like what advice would you give them in this area?
I think the easiest way to describe it is the complete amygdala hijack. Hopefully your folks understand what that is. It's when you did or said something out of, for me, it's usually hunger. And I'm
you don't
angry.
Get angry, do you, Loren?
Yeah, hangry is real.
Yeah, it is.
But you do or say something that later you're like, I could have really handled that differently or better. And when you start to recognize that regularly, you can get better at not doing that. And a lot of times with the clients I work with, they journal. At the end of every day, it's, as a leader, what do I think I did really well today? And what do I wish I had done differently? And what am I going to do about that? How would I handle a similar situation differently? Or sometimes it's, who do I need to apologize to? What do I need to say? What can I be grateful for about the people on my team? How can I find some way to appreciate all of them? But there's so many ways to become more emotionally intelligent by practicing it daily. I mean, not just empathy is one component, but I think anytime you're not practicing those emotional intelligence skills, you're getting worse at them. Unless they're top of mind and you're consistently thinking about how you're showing up. Sometimes even as simple as, I am having the worst day in the world, and I know that when I go into this meeting that's scheduled in an hour from now, I'm not going to be an effective human being. Is it a meeting I can cancel? Can I send somebody else to that meeting instead of me? Can I get the notes? And sometimes it's even being honest about that. Like, I'm having a rough day and I don't think I can show up the way that I need to be as effective as I need to be. And so I'm going to sit this one out. But we have to, in order to be able to do that, we have to create workplaces where it's okay to have conversations like that. Because if the workplace isn't a place you can have a conversation like that, you're in trouble if you are honest about it. So then your kid is sick, or you're, you just started throwing up 5 minutes ago or whatever. I'm not advocating people lying, but there's an element of safety that has to be there in order for people to be able to share those kinds of things. I mean, I remember there was the George Floyd event. Do you remember that? Way back?
Yeah.
And at the time I had a team that had a lot of Black women on it. And individually, each of them said to me, I am having a struggle today. And I said to them, and would have to anybody who came to me, no matter what their race, gender was, do what you need to do today to take care of yourself. And we will figure out the rest. Our job was not carrying kidneys and coolers. No one was going to die if we didn't show up to something that day. there wasn't anything that they needed to do that I couldn't either step in for or find someone else to step in for in that moment, when the most important thing to them was to care for their own psyche. And we don't always do that.
I love that. Yeah, it's so true. It's like you have to really have a psychologically safe workplace or agreements in place that allows you to be able to take a pass. You know, if you're not feeling 100% or you're just not there and you can't be present, like to be able to, like, that takes a special workplace. And I'm hoping, like, and that's what I try to do with this podcast, is let's have conversations so that way leaders who are listening to this can just take this back to their workplace and really transform what they're doing, because not every leader understands this stuff.
Not at all. It's funny. Last night I was watching Netflix.
Yeah. Did you watch? Yeah. What are you watching?
So I was watching The Night Agent, and I don't know if anybody has ever watched that.
I watched season 1, and I think season 2 just came out. I need to watch.
Yeah, season 2 just came out. There is I want to figure out how to get the rights to use this clip, but there's a part in it where the woman is not actually telling the truth, but she tells her boss that she needs to leave because her mother's having surgery and she needs to be gone for a couple of days. And his response is just about how critical of a time this is and how much her work is needed. And she's kind of pedaling around talking about how she can work remotely and she'll log in. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is everything that's wrong right now. So now when you watch it, you'll be able to hone in on that and see just toxic leadership in action right there.
You said you were inspired and had a lot of really good takeaways from the book called Leadership and Self-Deception. And I pulled this out because I actually just had interviewed somebody from the Arbinger Institute on this book several months ago. So I thought it's insightful as well. What did you learn about that book that influenced your own self-awareness around your own leadership?
I think the biggest takeaway for me, I read the book and literally was going, oh. But I think the biggest takeaway, and I think that and Tasha Urich's book kind of both do the same thing. No matter how self-aware you think you are, you have work to do.
Yep.
There's always going to be work for you to do. You're never going to get there. And it's always going to be consistent work and paying attention and getting feedback along the way. There needs to be feedback loops. And we rely so much on quantitative data, but I am telling you, qualitative data matters so much.
Yeah. In the section, honest communication and listening, you talk about the importance of leaning into vulnerability, which I think is hard for a lot of leaders. And then truly listening without judgment, also another hard thing for people. What steps did you take in this area to become a better listener, more vulnerable, especially when it doesn't come natural for a lot of people? And how did this shift really change the way you lead?
Hashtag accountability. Learning to take ownership in being part of the problem. So something went wrong, or I feel victimized by somebody or stepped on by somebody. What part did I play in that? Or what did I fail to recognize that was happening? Or what did I allow to happen that maybe I shouldn't have allowed to happen? Where could I have stepped in that I didn't step in? There's so much there. I think being able to admit your own mistakes, being able to ask for help will help other people do the same. That inspires more trust and loyalty than, oh my gosh, let's try to cover this up.
Yeah.
One of the stories in the book was about somebody whose leader asked them to lie to cover something up. And I hope no one ever has to be in that situation ever. No. Vulnerability, there's enough research out in the world that talks about how it enhances engagement and collaboration and team performance and buy-in. And if we could only recognize that we get so much better outcomes when we do that.
Yep.
And make it normalize vulnerability as a strength too, in addition to empathy.
Yeah. I got an example. This happened yesterday. So we have at Xenium, the company I represent, we have all team meetings every month, and we're so good about keeping them. And we do it. It's hybrid, but we do where most people are in person, and then we have people across the country that work for us, so we have a virtual option as well. But we had a segment yesterday that was one of my fellow senior leadership team members, Lacey, who's a frequent guest on this podcast. She was doing email best practices for the service team. So we have a lot of HR professionals and consultants and payroll specialists and benefits, and they're all they do a lot of client communication via email. She got up and was doing an email best practices thing, and she put up this email, and a lot of it was blacked out, but she was showing a mistake that she made. This is years ago, about how she accidentally BCC'd somebody on an email that she was talking about. And she shared this because she was horrified by it. And she's like, I don't want you to make the same mistake I did. And here's what I learned. And the fact that I was just wowed by her for doing this. She got up in front of almost 100 people showing this email, and you could see it, you could read it, and just was completely vulnerable. And hopefully everybody, and I could just see the faces, people were so engaged. And hopefully they don't make that same exact mistake as a result of her behavior. And I was just completely shocked by it and proud of her for doing that.
Things like that matter.
Yeah. People are always watching.
And it's funny because we talk about all the generations in the workplace right now, and we like to pin things on one generation or another. And there's so much similarity across all of them that we take for granted, but we love to put people in buckets, and it doesn't make us more effective. But the one thing that I can say that I think the late millennials and Gen Zs are really good at, that maybe people like me, who's a Gen Xer, or the baby boomers are not necessarily as good at, is standing up for things that we don't think are right and kind of voting with our feet as employees in an organization. So people will vote with their feet.
Mm-hmm. I was pleased to see you had a section on yes and I've done a podcast with somebody who is in leadership and coaching nowadays, but started in improv. And I love this because it's like you shift from like a fixed mindset and very resistant to like, if you just said no to something versus yes and is collaborative. Like unpack that for me. And people can go back and listen to one podcast I had just on the yes and approach. But how has this changed your leadership?
A lot of times when somebody brings something up, we think our job, especially if we're in a leadership role or an HR role, is to say, we're not going to do that, or no, that's really not a good idea, or we've tried that before and it didn't work. And if we shift our thinking towards more of a yes and mindset, we're considering possibilities instead of stunting things. So while it starts with something that you might think is the stupidest idea in the world, it can morph into something that could surprise you. Another way that I like to do this, especially what we'll call a brainstorming session, is brainwriting. Are you familiar with brainwriting?
Mm-mm.
So everybody writes whatever the problem that we're trying to solve is, or whatever the topic is. Everybody has a piece of paper and they write on it their solution to what it is, or their thoughts about what it is. You can use a thought, you can use a solution, however you want to use it. And then you take that piece of paper and pass it to the right. And then someone adds to your idea, and you take that piece of paper, pass it to the right. Someone adds to that idea. And then someone goes through all of the things. And then you kind of decide what is viable and what we can do about it.
So clever. I've never heard that before, but I can see how collaborative and like you're just building on another idea. Like how cool would that be? Like I'm sure the output is incredible.
I think it's kind of like, do you know the concept of positive emotional attraction?
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is use positive emotional attractors to move things forward instead of having people stuck in a negative state of being.
So we've talked a lot about empathy and the ways that we can build this empathy muscle. You, in the end, just describe empathy as an ultra marathon and emphasize the importance of like just small, consistent steps towards self-awareness, being intentional, and practicing empathy on a regular basis. So for people listening, what are some first steps they can take to take those small steps that you're talking about that they could, go on their own journey to being a more empathetic leader? What's a good takeaway for them?
Oftentimes I come across people that say, well, I have no empathy. And I'm like, oh, so you're a sociopath. No, but the reality is, if it's something you're not good at, try practicing, just like any other thing that you practice the skills for. Try practicing the skills, and the book gives you 7 pretty good skills to practice and opportunities for self-reflection. If you are practicing, you get better. In the same way that you can teach people who have autism what people who don't have autism think is normal. And I hate using normal as a term for anything, but there's certain social cues that you can teach people to recognize, or certain faces you can teach people to recognize. This means somebody's scared. This means somebody's unhappy. Starting to build on recognizing what's happening around you is a big piece of that. If you don't know where you are right now, you don't know if you're empathetic or not, ask people you trust.
Yeah.
I love the exercise of asking 3 to 5 people that you trust deeply how they think other people describe you or how they would describe you. You can get some pretty good information that way. But there has to be an element of trust to do that. If you're in a work environment with a 360, when you get that 360 done, don't send it to your BFFs. Send it to people who are going to tell the truth about you, who you've had good and bad experiences with. And then you have to be willing. If you're not willing to face what the output is, that's a whole different conversation. And those people who are highly empathetic, especially those in helping professions, have to learn not to just focus on the negative component and recognize that there is some good in them and they can appreciate that good. But this is why I like to have my clients journal, because a lot of times they'll come and tell me, 6 months ago, here's where I was. And I noticed I journaled about this and I looked back at where I was before and I see how far I have come. And it's a good opportunity for you to really plot your own journey and tell your own story. I believe everybody has a story to tell, and we should all be telling them.
Loren, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. This was such a fun discussion. Your book is called Empathy is Not a Weakness and Other Stories from the Edge. And I appreciate the vulnerability that's in this book too, just sharing your story, and I know others will connect with it. I know I did. Where can people connect with you, or what's the best way for them to follow your work?
Probably LinkedIn is where I share the most of everything. And in fact, if people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, the first 2 people to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a note that they heard about the book on your podcast, I will send those 2 people a free copy of the book signed.
Oh, amazing. That's what an awesome offer. Appreciate you offering that. My guest today has been Loren Sanders, the author of Empathy is Not a Weakness. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. What a blast.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.